The slap echoed down the corridor of Thornbury Hall before the silk of Lady Cordelia's gown had even settled. Filthy creature. Do not touch what you could never afford. The gray-haired servant lowered her chin half an inch and lifted it again, steady as cathedral stone. The teapot in her hands did not tremble. 30 years of practice had taught her that. What Lady Cordelia could not know, on that bright March morning in 1818, was that the woman she had struck owned the road her carriage had traveled, the bank that held her father's mortgage, and the very title her family had purchased in secret. Moments later, the Duke of Ravensworth strode past his own mother without recognizing her face. He carried cream roses for the woman who had just slapped a duchess, and the dowager had not yet decided whether to save him or let him fall. Cordelia Blackwood had not planned to use her hand. She had planned to use her voice. She had been rehearsing voices since dawn. The voice for greeting Theodore, the voice for greeting his mother, the voice for the cook, the voice for the photographer. She had a different one for each. The voice she had reserved for the corridor was disdain, a clipped vowel, a short consonant, enough warmth to convey that she had noticed, just enough cold to convey that she had nothing further to add. But the hem of her gown was new. The silk had been delivered from Bruton Street 2 days before. She had stood for fittings 4 separate times. She had instructed the seamstress, against the seamstress's professional advice, to leave the length impractical. She had been told, more than once, that the hem would brush the floor in a way any passing shoe could mark. She had not been interested in the seamstress's professional advice. The hem looked the way she wanted it to look. That was the only criterion that mattered. So when the toe of an older woman's shoe brushed the very tip of the new silk in the upper corridor of Thornbury Hall, at 3 minutes past noon on the 17th of March, in the year 1923, the disdain Cordelia had prepared was no longer adequate. Her hand came up before her mouth could. The slap was short. The slap was not loud. It was the kind of slap that carried only the distance a hand could throw it, but it carried enough. The footman at the far end of the corridor heard it. The under-housemaid coming up the stairs heard it. The boy with the basket of greenery on the landing heard it. None of them turned their heads. They had learned not to. Looking, in such a house, was the most expensive thing a servant could do. The woman who had been struck did not stagger. She held a silver tray in her hands. The tray bore 3 porcelain cups, a small jug of milk, a sugar bowl, and a teapot. None of the items shifted. The woman had 30 years of practice in not allowing trays to shift. She lowered her chin half an inch. Cordelia waited for her to lower it further, to apologize, to weep, to do any of the things older women in service had been trained for 2 centuries to do under such a hand. The woman did none of them. She lifted her chin again, just to the place it had been before the slap. It was the recovery that infuriated Cordelia most. "You filthy creature." She did not raise her voice. She whispered it. Whispers were her mother's preferred weapon, and Cordelia had been her mother's student for a long time. Do not touch what you could never afford. The woman with the tray did not answer. She moved past, with the small, efficient sidestep of a maid who had been asked to clear a path many times in her life, and she carried the tray onward toward the back stair, without breaking pace. In the doorway of the dressing room behind them, the lady's maid who had been pinning Cordelia's hair stood frozen with 3 pearl-beaded pins held between her teeth. Cordelia swept past her. The lady's maid did not breathe out until the door of the dressing room had closed. What none of the 4 witnesses in that corridor could have guessed at 3 minutes past noon on the 17th of March was the identity of the woman in the dark dress. The shoe that had brushed the silk belonged to the woman who owned the road the front gate opened onto, the bank that held the mortgage on the house. The portrait painter, who had been commissioned 12 years before to paint the only image of Cordelia's grandmother that was now considered respectable. The factor's wife whose recommendation had secured Cordelia's place at the only finishing school in Sussex that mattered. The cheek that had absorbed the strike belonged to the Duchess of Ravensworth, and the silk of that hem would be cut from the gown by a stranger and sold by the yard in a back room in Marylebone before the next August was out. 3 months before that corridor in Surrey, the first cause of it had begun, in a city in which it never quite stopped raining. London in February of the year 1923 was the kind of London a foreigner would have struggled to describe to anyone at home. The river did not freeze that winter. The fog did not lift. The lamplighters did their rounds and gave up and did them again and gave up again. The mornings were colorless. The afternoons were shorter than the newspapers made them sound. Inside the long gallery, on the upper floor of Ravensworth Manor in Mayfair, a woman in a dark gray morning dress had taken to standing at a particular angle every day at 7:15. She did not stand for grief. The grief had been resolved, as much as such things resolve, 6 years before. She stood because the portrait of her late husband returned a certain kind of silence she had not been able to find elsewhere in the house since his death. The portrait was of Edward, the 7th Duke. It had been painted in the year before he died. The painter had complained about the chair Edward had insisted on sitting in. Edward had complained about the painter's pipe smoke. They had reached, by the end of the 3rd sitting, the kind of friendship men of that generation arrived at only after sufficient mutual irritation. The painter had attended the funeral. He had not been able to look at the portrait afterward without flinching, and had moved his studio to Cornwall later the same year. Cornwall, he had decided, was a long enough distance from a room that contained a painting of a man he had liked. Adelaide had inherited the portrait, the title for her lifetime, and the responsibility for a son. The son was the matter at hand this morning. She lifted the cup at her left elbow. The tea was cold. It had been cold for 40 minutes. She drank it anyway. She had learned not to waste tea. Edward had once observed that the cheapest test of a person's character was whether they finished a cold cup. She had laughed at him then. She no longer laughed at the line. She had been performing the test on herself, daily, for 6 years. He is 28, Edward. She did not always speak aloud. This morning she did. You told me what this year would be. You did not tell me how I would know when it had begun. I have had to learn that part by myself. The portrait did not answer. She had not expected it to. The 4th board outside the gallery door creaked at 20 minutes past 7. It creaked at exactly that hour every morning. The board had been creaking under Mr. Hargrove's weight since the autumn of 1903. She had been offered twice to have it replaced. She had refused twice. She had not given a reason. Hargrove had been with the family long enough to understand reasons that had not been given. Your Grace? Yes. A letter has come. By special hand. I have placed it on the small table in the morning room. From whom? It is unsigned on the outside. The seal is gold wax with a crest I do not recognize. The boy was instructed to wait for a reply. He will wait, yes, and the colonel. He has not yet arrived. He is expected at 11. Tell him when he comes. I will receive him in the small library. He will know which one. Yes. She did not turn from the portrait until the footsteps had withdrawn. There was a difference, in the staff at Ravensworth, between withdrawal and retreat. The board outside the gallery door knew the difference better than most of the staff did. She finished the last of the cold tea. She set the cup back in its saucer with the small, careful sound of a woman who had decided what kind of day she meant to have. There was a particular motion she allowed herself only in this gallery. Only on mornings she expected to require a longer steadiness than usual. She lifted her right hand, placed against the gilt frame of the portrait beneath the lower corner. She held them there for the length of one slow exhale. Then she let go. The gallery was a long room. She walked the length of it in 27 steps. She had counted them once. The number did not change. The number was a strange small comfort she had not yet outgrown. The small library at Ravensworth Manor was not strictly A library. It had been Edward's working room before he died. A pair of long windows that gave on the rear garden. A desk of darkened oak that had been his father's. 3 chairs, 2 of them for company, 1 of them for him. Bookshelves on 2 walls. A fire that was always lit between October and April. A side table with a single decanter that Hargrove kept filled with the only whiskey in the house Edward had liked. The Duchess used the room sparingly. She used it on the days she required Edward to be present without being seen. Colonel James Ashworth arrived at 3 minutes past 11. He was a tall man. His pulse had outlasted the rest of his frame. His hair was the white of a coastline in winter. His left hand was always gloved, because he had lost 2 fingers in 1916 and did not enjoy the conversation that followed when people noticed. He had been Edward's closest friend for 41 years. He had been hers for 6. He carried a slim leather portfolio under his arm. He set it on the desk before he sat. He did not greet her with the affection of an old friend he never had. The affection was kept for the spaces between greetings. James, Adelaide. You have it. I have what is available. I have not been able to verify the Vienna matter directly. The rest is solid. He opened the portfolio. What was inside was less than she had expected. A bound notebook in his own hand. A folded receipt from a hotel in Brighton with 3 signatures on it. One of them Cordelia's, one of them the lover's. A list of dates and addresses, written in his neat clerk's hand. And 1 photograph. He laid the photograph face up on the desk between them. She did not pick it up. She did not need to. The photograph had been taken at a distance with a long lens in the bright light of an autumn afternoon by the sea. A woman in a fur collar. A man in a gray overcoat. They were walking along the promenade. They were not arm in arm, but the small distance between them was, to a watching eye, the most expressive part of the picture. Sebastian Crowe? Yes. Cordelia's, by what arrangement? Engaged, without paperwork. By a private agreement reached in October. He is waiting for her to marry Theodore. He has been promised a share of whatever she carries away from the marriage. He is a patient man. He has spent 2 years at Marshalsea for fraud. He understands how to wait, and the title was purchased. The patent of nobility for the Blackwood line had lapsed in 1894, when the original family ended without issue. A clerk at the College of Arms reissued it irregularly. The clerk has since retired to a small house in Brighton that he could not have afforded on his official salary. I have his name. I have his address. I have not yet approached him, because approaching him before this week would have alerted everyone we do not want it alerted. Mrs. Blackwood, born Hortense Pratt, daughter of a draper in Manchester. The draper's name had been less elegant than Pratt, and she changed it as soon as she could. Married a manufacturer named Frederick Blackwood. No relation to the original noble line, who took the original family's surname to facilitate the purchase. They have 1 daughter. The daughter has been raised on the lie. She has lived it long enough that she may believe parts of it. She does not, however, believe all of it. A girl who watches servants the way that one does. Knows what she is. The debt, owed to a gentleman in Vienna. The amount is substantial. The terms are not negotiable. The lender is patient until the autumn. He has been patient because Mrs. Blackwood traveled 3 years ago to a hotel in Salzburg and met him. And he was persuaded that the title was secure, and he was wrong. He will not be wrong much longer. The lender does not customarily lend to families of this size. He will not customarily extend when he discovers that his collateral has been forged. And what they will do, marry the daughter as quickly as possible. Use the engagement announcement as collateral against the marriage settlement. Take whatever liquid sums they can extract from Theodore in the first 6 months. Settle the debt. Disappear with Mr. Crowe to whatever port will receive them. The port is currently Marseilles. The cargo arrangements have been made through a shipping firm in Liverpool, the principal of whom has a long history of taking on freight, whose origin he has been paid not to investigate. He was silent. She was silent. The fire shifted. A coal collapsed inward. Neither of them looked at the fire. She looked instead at the photograph. It was a small thing, taken at a distance. It would not have been admissible as evidence in any court. The signatures from the Brighton Hotel might have been useful, but they were two of many such signatures, and a man with a good lawyer could have explained them away. The list of dates was conjecture without testimony. The investigation, in the formal sense, was incomplete. In the informal sense, it was complete. Adelaide had needed less than half of what was on the desk to be certain. Show this to Theodore. He will defend her. Yes, he will. He will defend her until you have done him the courtesy of letting him see it for himself. There is no education in our family, as you remember, equal to being permitted to fail privately and recover quietly. Edward would have agreed with me. He would have. Then burn the photograph. He looked at her. He was not surprised. He had known her for 6 years as a friend, and for 36 as Edward's wife. And during the 36, he had occasionally observed the kind of calm she was capable of when she had decided what to do. He had observed the same calm in Edward at certain moments. Before a difficult appointment, he had not been entirely certain, until this morning, that Adelaide had inherited it. Burn it. If I keep it, I will be tempted to use it. I am not going to use it. I am going to use them. How? By accepting an invitation that arrived this morning, by traveling on the 17th to a house in Surrey, by not arriving in the way they expect, by learning what kind of woman my son believes himself to love, and by ensuring on the same afternoon that she learns the same about herself. You will go dressed. I will go as a hired assistant from an agency. They have invited me for the night before the official party. There will be a great deal of preparation that afternoon. They will not notice the addition of one more pair of hands. They will, however, treat that pair of hands in a manner that will permit me to make my decisions. He shook his head, slowly, not in disapproval, in a kind of small, sad admiration. He would have been proud of you, Adelaide. He would have been frightened for me. Both. He picked up the photograph. He held it close to the fire. He waited until the flame had caught the corner. He laid it onto the coals carefully. The image curled inward. The face of Cordelia Blackwood, smaller than a postage stamp in the photograph, was the last part of the picture to be consumed. He did not stay for lunch. He had business in town, the kind of business that would, over the next 3 weeks, place a senior officer of Scotland Yard at a particular hotel in Folkestone on a particular Wednesday in March. He kissed the back of her hand at the front door, which he had not done in 11 months, and walked down the front steps without putting on his hat. She did not return to the gallery for the rest of the morning. She had the rest of the day to plan. The first time Theodore had seen Cordelia Blackwood was at a private ball in November. The Marchmonts' house in Park Lane was the kind of house that did not advertise its parties. The footman at the front door took your name and your hat, and did not greet you by either. The cards on the mantel were arranged by the end of an evening in an order that suggested no one had read them. You knew you had been at a Marchmont evening, only because the next morning your bootman commented that the leather had been polished by a stranger. Theodore had not been invited verbally. He had been invited by card. The card had been sent because his father had been kind to old Lord Marchmont, who had died in 1919. The widow had kept the kindness in a small drawer and had honored it now by inviting the son. Theodore had been told by an older cousin who knew such things that he ought to go because the women he ought to know would be there. He had gone. He had not been particularly interested. He had stood near the door for the first half hour, conversing with the small number of men of his own age he recognized, accepting a glass of champagne, and watching, with the polite distance of a young man who had spent most of the autumn at his estate in the country, the room arrange itself around the orchestra at the far end. Then a woman had walked past him in ivory silk, ivory, not white, not cream. The ivory of an old piano key that has been played by 3 generations of hands. The kind of color that does not announce itself and so demands a second look from anyone who has been trained to notice. She had been on the arm of a man Theodore did not know. The man, he understood at once, was not a husband. The man was an escort. The way she did not look at him said so. She had passed 3 feet from Theodore's elbow. She had not looked at Theodore. That was the part that had caught him. He had been 28 years old. He had been the only son of one of the 4 largest fortunes in southern England. He had been used to being looked at. He had been used, in fact, to being looked at in a particular way by young women of fortune at parties of this sort. They looked, and they smiled, and they passed, and they expected to be approached. This one had not looked. He had been trained, by every instinct of his upbringing, to receive non-attention as a kind of challenge. He had thought it. He had not yet acted on it. He had thought it for the duration of 1 waltz, while the woman in ivory had danced with her escort and laughed at something he had not been able to hear, and had been led off the floor by her escort with the small reluctance of a woman who had not yet finished her evening. The escort had taken her toward a group of 3 older women near the orchestra. The escort had bowed. The escort had gone to find her a drink. Theodore had crossed the room. He had not asked himself why. He had not asked himself whether. He had moved the way young men of his class and standing moved when they had decided. The floor had cleared in front of him. 2 younger gentlemen had stepped aside without appearing to. A glass of champagne had appeared in his hand without his having ordered one. He had arrived at the small group near the orchestra with the easy momentum of a man who had not been required to negotiate his approach. The introduction had been performed by the eldest of the 3 older women, who had been a friend of his mother's once, and who had, in some private space behind her eyes, been waiting for an opportunity to perform exactly this introduction since the announcement of his coming-of-age lord. Ravensworth, may I present Miss Cordelia Blackwood? Miss Blackwood, Lord Ravensworth. I have been warned about you. By whom? By every woman in this room who has a daughter. And what did they warn you? That you have not been seen this season, which means, in their language, that you have not yet been chosen, he had laughed. Properly. Loudly enough that the eldest of the older women had glanced at him, with a small smile of satisfaction that suggested her work for the evening was done. And have you also been warned not to choose me, Miss Blackwood? I have been warned not to be obvious about it. You are not being obvious. I am being calibrated. There is a difference. He had laughed again. He had stayed at her elbow for the remainder of the evening. By the 3rd dance, he had decided he was going to write to his mother. In the morning, by the 5th, he had decided he was going to send flowers. By the time he had retrieved his hat from the silent footman at the door, he had decided that he was, in some way he could not yet articulate, finished with whatever he had been before that ball. He had not seen the woman who had been quietly observing him from across the room all evening. His mother had not attended that ball. But the eldest of the 3 older women near the orchestra had written to her by the morning post on the following Monday. My dear Adelaide, you should know that Theodore has begun to spend time with a young woman whose family is not yet clear to me and whom I find well-mannered but somehow not arranged, and I would be a poor friend if I did not say so. The letter had arrived at Ravensworth Manor on Tuesday afternoon. The Duchess had read it twice. She had set it down beside her cold cup of tea. She had walked into the gallery that afternoon, and she had looked at the portrait, and she had said only once, "She is beginning." The first time Adelaide had observed Miss Cordelia Blackwood at any close distance had not been at a ball. It had been at a tea. The tea had been held in late January at the house of Lady Bellingham, who lived in a narrow Georgian house on Wilton Crescent, and who had been raising funds since the autumn for a small hospital in Battersea that admitted only women and children. Adelaide had been a patron of the hospital since its founding. She had agreed to attend the tea because Lady Bellingham had asked, in a private note, whether she might. She had agreed because she had known, without having to be told, that Cordelia Blackwood would also be there. Mrs. Hortense Blackwood had been campaigning since November to attach herself to charities of the better kind. The Battersea Hospital had been on her list since Christmas. Adelaide arrived 20 minutes after the named hour, which was her habit. She entered the drawing room without ceremony. She nodded to Lady Bellingham, to two cousins of her late husband, and to a journalist who had been invited to write a discreet paragraph about the afternoon, and who was on his best behavior. She accepted a cup of tea. She did not drink it. She did not approach Cordelia. She did not need to. She positioned herself, instead, near the long window that looked out over the small back garden, in a chair from which she could observe the room without directly observed in return. She had been performing this small spatial decision in drawing rooms since the year she had been 23. It had not yet failed her. Cordelia was at the far end of the room, beside Lady Bellingham's elderly companion. The companion was a Miss Yates. She had lived with Lady Bellingham for 19 years. She was perhaps 68. She had the hands of a woman who had once played the piano competently and now did not. She had been kind to Adelaide 20 years before, on the morning of an earlier difficulty, and Adelaide had not forgotten it. Miss Yates was, that afternoon, in charge of the table where the donations were received. The donations were received in the form of small, folded cards. Each card carried the name of the donor, the amount pledged, and a space for a brief message that would be printed, later, in a small commemorative pamphlet to be circulated to subscribers in the spring. The cards were a quiet device. They permitted the wealthy to be generous without requiring them to discuss it. They permitted the less wealthy to participate without embarrassment. Cordelia approached the table with her mother. They had brought a card prepared in advance. Hortense was wearing a hat that had been mentioned in 2 newspapers that month. She had a small leather purse in her left hand. Cordelia handed Miss Yates the card. Miss Yates read it. She paused. She looked up. Miss Blackwood. There appears to have been a small error in the amount, the figure here. May I confirm? You may confirm whatever you wish, the voice in which Cordelia said it was the voice she used in the corridor outside the dressing room 2 months later. The same clipped vowel, the same short consonant. The voice of a young woman who had been informed by her mother that morning of the value of a particular sum, and who was not in the mood to have the value discussed in front of the room. Miss Yates flushed slightly. It is only that. The figure entered here. It is the same figure your mother entered last March. I had thought this year. Given the excuse me, Miss Blackwood, I do not mean to give offense. I simply wish to confirm that the figure is intentional. It is intentional. Hortense leaned in. Miss, my daughter has explained the figure. We have explained the figure. We will not be revising it. You will record what has been written. Miss Yates lowered her head. She picked up the pen. The pen shook very slightly. Not because Miss Yates was offended. Because Miss Yates had been a companion in a house long enough to recognize, by tone alone, the woman who had informed the household of her displeasure at having been required to repeat herself. Adelaide watched all of it from the chair by the window. She did not approach. She did not intervene. She drank finally half of the cold tea in her hand. The journalist had not noticed. The cousins of her late husband had not noticed. Lady Bellingham had not noticed, because Lady Bellingham was at the far end of the rooms speaking with the wife of a member of Parliament about the licensing laws. Adelaide had noticed. She had thought, with the precision of a woman who had spent the last 6 years arranging her own emotional accounting carefully, the following thing. My son is going to marry a woman who can adjust her voice for a 68-year-old companion at a charity table without altering her face. He is going to marry her because she has trained herself well, and one day, when I am no longer here, that voice will be the voice my grandchildren learn to fear before they have the words to describe what they are afraid of, and the fear will be inherited. The way certain china is inherited, the way certain debts are. She set down the cup of cold tea. She crossed the room, slowly, in the direction of the donations table. Not toward Cordelia, toward Miss Yates. She arrived at the table after the Blackwoods had moved on. Miss Yates, Your Grace, I have not yet made my contribution. Would you be kind enough to record one for me also? Of course, Your Grace. Adelaide named a figure. The figure was 3 times the largest single donation Miss Yates had received that afternoon. Miss Yates wrote it down. Her hand had stopped shaking. And Miss Yates, yes. You find, at any point this evening, that you require a fresh pot of tea brought to you in a quieter room, you have only to send word. I will arrange it. A small, startled smile. Thank you, Your Grace. Adelaide left the tea 15 minutes later. She did not say goodbye to Lady Bellingham. She did not say goodbye to the Blackwoods. She walked the half-mile home through the cold afternoon air, alone, refusing the offer of a hired motor. She walked because she had been making a decision since the cup of cold tea, and she had not yet completed it. By the time she reached her own front steps, she had completed it. The dinner at which Theodore announced his intention to propose to Miss Cordelia Blackwood took place on the second Friday of February. He had been invited for 7:30. He arrived at 12 minutes past 8. Adelaide did not comment on the lateness. She had stopped commenting on it 3 weeks before. She had decided that commenting on it would either change his behavior, in which case he would owe the change to her observation rather than to his own judgment, or it would not change his behavior, in which case the comment would have been a form of begging. She did not beg her son. She had not begun. She did not intend to start. He came in still wearing his evening overcoat. He had not been at home to change. He had been at the Ritz with Cordelia and Hortense, and a cousin of Cordelia's, whose name was not worth remembering. Mother, Theodore, I am late. You are. Sit, you have eaten, I have begun. The pheasant will not improve from waiting, he sat. The pheasant had been roasted by the cook to a precise condition Edward had once described, in a private letter to his boss, as the best dish in the house. Adelaide had instructed the cook to prepare it this evening, because she had not been certain how the evening would go, and she had wanted Theodore to remember later that the food had been good. She watched him cut the first slice. She watched the way he did not taste it. You are not eating, I am. I am only thinking. Tell me what you are thinking. He set down his knife. I have come to inform you that I intend to ask Cordelia. Before Easter. I would like you to know, before Easter. Yes, why before Easter? Because her mother has indicated that the Blackwoods would prefer a summer wedding. And a summer wedding requires the announcement no later than April. Her mother has indicated. Yes, and the wedding is to be arranged at the convenience of her mother. Mother, Theodore. You are going to dislike whatever I say next. I am going to listen. Begin. He began. He told her, in the careful order of a young man who had rehearsed his arguments on a walk in St. James's earlier in the day, how he had come to know Cordelia better in the last 2 months than he had known any young woman in his life. How her conversation surprised him, how her family was perhaps less established than some, but established enough, and the very fact of their newer prominence was something he found refreshing rather than otherwise. How a marriage between the houses would, in his view, modernize the public face of Ravensworth in a manner his father, were he living, would have approved. She let him finish. She did not interrupt. She had learned 20 years ago that the surest way to a man's deeper sincerity was to allow him to exhaust his rehearsed one. When he had finished, the pheasant on his plate was cold. He had not touched the second slice. The footman had withdrawn at the start of the speech, on a small signal from Hargrove. They were alone with the candles and a single bottle of claret that had been opened too early. Theodore, yes, you have spoken for 9 minutes. You have not, in 9 minutes, used a single word that describes Miss Blackwood's character. You have described her conversation. You have described her family. You have described what marrying her would modernize. You have not told me what kind of woman she is. I do not believe you yet. No, I know. Tell me. She is. She is generous. She has a sense of humor. Is with my dullness about politics. She loves me. Mother, has she said so? In her way, Theodore. Yes. In whose way? He looked at her. For the first time in the evening, there was a small crack at the corner of his composure. It was a young man's crack. The kind that comes when a question lands not because the question is cruel, but because the question he had been hoping not to be asked. Her own way, which is, Mother. You have not been with us. You cannot judge what you have not seen. I have been with you twice. The Bellingham tea in January, the Russell luncheon last week. I have not been absent from this matter, Theodore. I have been very quietly present, and you object to her. I object to the version of her you have arranged in your mind. I do not yet know whether I object to the woman herself. The two are not the same. He pushed the plate slightly forward. You do not approve of any woman. That is the second time you have said so. It was not true the first time. It is not true now. I approved of the Marsden girl in 1920. I approved of Eliza Pelham, briefly, in 1921. I have approved of two others you have not mentioned in some years. I did not impose my approval. You did not choose any of them. You would not have known. I approved had you not asked. You did not ask. You will notice that you have not this evening asked me whether I approve of Miss Blackwood. You have informed me of your intention. There is a difference. Edward would have recognized the difference at 20. You are 28, and you have, on this matter, decided not to recognize it. A long silence. He looked at the fire. He looked at the candles. He looked at the small thread of wax that was beginning to drip down the side of the candle nearest the centerpiece. Have you read your father's letter? He stiffened. I will read it. You have been saying that since October, Mother. You have moved it twice. From the breakfast table to the hall. From the hall to your study. From your study to the corner of the desk, where it has been since the second week of November, beneath the small paperweight you bought in Cornwall the summer you were 24. How do you know all of that? I went into the Albany rooms one afternoon while you were at the club. I did not touch the letter, I only looked. I left. He set down his glass. The hand was unsteady. That was not your right. It was not. I am telling you because I would rather you knew. I would rather not start this year by pretending I have not done a thing I have done. He stood. He bowed. The bow was shallow. He was angry. And he had not yet learned how to bow in anger. I will see you next week. You will see me when you have read the letter. He went to the door. In the doorway he paused. He turned. His face was the face of a boy of 9. For 1/2 second, the boy of 9 looked at his mother. The boy of 9 could not say what the man of 28 needed to. Then the man of 28 closed the door. She did not finish the pheasant either. She sat at the table for another 40 minutes alone, with the candles guttering, and the wax on the side of the centerpiece reaching down toward the linen, and the bottle of claret returning to room temperature. Hargrove came in twice. He did not speak. He removed the plates the second time. He took the wax off the linen with the back of a small flat knife. He left the candles where they were until they had finished burning themselves out. She had not lied to him about the visit to the Albany. She had let herself in on a Wednesday afternoon in early February while Theodore had been at his club for lunch with two friends who would later, on the same Wednesday, separately and independently, write to her with worries about his recent behavior. She had used the spare key her son had given her 7 years before, and had forgotten to ask for back. She had brought no servant. She carried only a small handbag and a copy of a periodical she had not yet read. She had walked through the front rooms, tidy in the way men of his class were tidy, which is to say arranged by a staff he did not see, a pair of riding gloves on a side table, an invitation card to a regimental dinner he would not attend, a cigarette case open by the fire, 3 cigarettes still inside. She had walked into the study. The study was a long, narrow room with one tall window and a desk arranged to face the window. The desk was clear, except for three objects: a blotter with the year embossed in the corner, a photograph of his father at the age of 40 in a small leather frame that Theodore had taken to the country in 1919 and had brought back to London a year later, and a single sealed envelope at the right-hand corner of the desk. The envelope was kept in place by a small round paperweight of green serpentine that he had bought in Lizard Point the summer of his 24th year. She had stood for a long time looking at it. She had not touched the envelope. She had not lifted the paperweight. She had only looked. She had looked the way a woman looks at the door of a room she has been told not to enter. When she knows the door is locked and is grateful for the lock, she had walked out of the study after 7 minutes. She had let herself out of the Albany rooms. She had walked home in a light snow that had begun to fall sometime between her arrival and her leaving. She had not spoken to anyone the rest of the day. She had not even spoken to the portrait. 3 weeks later, a cream envelope arrived at Ravensworth Manor by a private hand. The envelope had a gold wax seal. The crest of the seal was small and unfamiliar and had been pressed into the wax with a fresh dye. The handwriting on the front was hired. The phrasing inside was lifted from an etiquette manual that had been popular among women who had recently come into money, and was almost correct. Mrs. Hortense Blackwood formally requested the honor of receiving Her Grace the Duchess of Ravensworth at Thornbury Hall on the afternoon and night of the 17th of March for a small private gathering of mutual acquaintance. Before any formal announcement might be made concerning the future of their two distinguished houses, Adelaide read the invitation twice. She set it down. She rang for Hargrove. Reply on Wednesday. Tell them yes. Tell them with thanks. Yes, Your Grace. And then sit down. We have arrangements to make. He sat. He had not sat in her presence since the death of her husband. He sat now because she had asked him to. The asking was a small ceremony between them. It was the way she signaled that what was about to be said was not a household matter. It was a matter of conscience. She told him what she intended. He did not flinch. He raised, with the most careful tone of a man who had served 3 generations, the matter of the risk. The risk is not what you fear, she said. The risk is that I do not go and lose him. Anything else you might call a risk is, in a true accounting, only an inconvenience. Yes, Your Grace, you will arrange that I arrive on the 16th, the day before the official party, quietly, by a hired brougham, as an additional assistant from a London agency. The agency will be paid in cash and will be told a name I will give you. They have placed several such temporary staff at country houses before the great parties of the season. They will not ask questions. Mr. Hargrove. Yes. Mr. Vale will lead the procession of household motors on the 17th, at the hour I will tell you. You will be in the lead motor. Mr. Garrick of Scotland Yard will be in the second. There will be a third motor, which will leave Thornbury with a young woman in it whose name will be Eliza Whitcomb. You will not know her until you meet her. You will, after that evening, treat her as you would treat a member of my own household. Yes. And Hargrove, yes. If something goes wrong, if I have miscalculated, if I am detained for any reason, you will come for me whether you have been instructed to or not. You will use what authority you have. You will use what authority I have. You will not wait for permission. His face did not move. His mouth did. I will not wait, Your Grace. She did not thank him. The thanks would have been a slight against 30 years of service. She went upstairs the next morning at an hour earlier than usual. She dismissed her lady's maid with a story about a headache. She locked the door of her dressing room from the inside. She walked to the wardrobe at the far wall, opened it, and took down 4 garments that had been folded inside it since the winter of 1919. A dark woolen dress without ornament, a coarser apron, a pair of black shoes whose soles had been resoled 3 times by the same cobbler in Bermondsey, who had never asked who he was working for. A plain white cap. She undressed. The diameter of her throat went into a small velvet box. The ring on her right hand went next. The ring on her left hand was different. She slid the wedding band off slowly. She took, from the second drawer of her dressing table, a small silver chain she had purchased 6 years before and had never worn. She threaded the wedding band onto the chain. She fastened the chain at the back of her own neck, beneath the high collar of the dark wool. She had not told anyone she intended to keep it on her body. She had not, until the moment of doing it, told herself. She stood before the long mirror in the corner of the dressing room. She had been the Duchess of Ravensworth for 31 years. The Duchess was no longer in the mirror. In her place was a woman of 53 who had spent her life in service. The woman had no rings, no jewels, no history that could be read from her clothing. She had the kind of face that, encountered in a hallway, would not be retained. Adelaide picked up the cotton gloves. She drew them on. One finger at a time, she spoke aloud. Not to herself. To the husband whose portrait was downstairs in the gallery. I am about to learn what kind of woman our son believes himself to love. I am about to learn it in the only language that has ever told women the truth about each other. Wish me a steady eye, Edward. She closed the wardrobe behind her. The brougham that left Ravensworth Manor at 5:30 on the morning of the 16th was not the Rolls. The Rolls had a crest on each door. The Rolls had a driver whose family had served the Ravensworths for 3 generations and who would have known her fists in any disguise within 10 yards. The Rolls had been sent for cleaning that morning, on an instruction Hargrove had issued the night before specifically to ensure that the driver of the Rolls did not see the woman who had no intention of being seen. The brougham was a hired one. Plain, black. The kind of carriage commonly used by hospital boards and by funeral directors who could not afford a motor. The driver had been hired through an intermediary. He had been paid in cash and had been told only that he was to take a single female passenger from the side gate of a Mayfair house to an address in Surrey by a particular route, with 2 changes of horses, and that the passenger was not to be addressed unless she addressed him first. He had been paid a sum sufficient to ensure his lack of curiosity. He had not asked questions. He brought the brougham to the side gate at 5:20. The woman who came out of the side gate was carrying a small leather case. She climbed up without his assistance, because the assistance had not been part of his instructions. She closed the door behind her. She did not speak. The wheels turned. The morning was the kind of London morning that had not yet decided whether it was going to be a day. The gas lamps along the streets had been dimmed but not extinguished. A milk float passed them at the corner of Park Lane. 2 newsboys stood at the entrance of Hyde Park Corner tube station, waiting for the first papers to arrive from the printers. The river beyond was the color of old pewter. She did not look back at the house. She did not need to. In the gallery, the portrait would be where she had left it. In a room at the Albany, the small green paperweight on the corner of a desk would be holding down the same sealed envelope it had been holding down since November. In a back kitchen in Mayfair, a young cook was putting on her apron and beginning to peel potatoes for a lunch the Duchess would not be present to eat. The brougham crossed the river at Vauxhall. It made its way south through the slow-waking streets of the suburbs. It paused for 20 minutes at a coaching inn at Cobham to change horses. The driver did not knock at the carriage door. The carriage door did not open. The Duchess sat inside on the small upholstered bench, with her hands folded in her lap and her face turned toward the window, and watched the country come awake. A boy with a slingshot. A farmer cleaning the wheels of a cart. 2 women hanging laundry on a line behind a small cottage. She had not seen the country from this height of carriage in many years. She had forgotten how slow it was. At Effingham, they changed horses again. The driver took 25 minutes this time. She used the 25 minutes to step out of the brougham, alone, and walk 50 yards along a hedgerow to test whether her shoes pinched. They did, slightly. She accepted it. She had not worn the shoes since the winter of 1919, And feet, like a great many other things a woman owned, had a memory of their own. By the time the broom turned off the Guildford Road and onto the long avenue of Thornbury Hall, the early afternoon had darkened into the color of cold milk. She did not see the house. She saw the back of it. The driver, in accordance with his instructions, took the narrow surface that ran along the eastern paddock, between a stand of poplars that had been planted to look older than they were, and brought the brougham to a halt at a low wooden gate set into the garden wall. A small painted sign above the gate read Tradessemen. Beneath the sign, scratched into the wood by a boy with a stolen key, was a coarse word she had not seen in print in 40 years. She stepped down alone. She rang the bell. The bell was rope-pulled and stiff. It rang twice before it was answered. The door opened. The woman behind the door had a face like a county magistrate having a bad afternoon. A heavy key ring at her hip. Hands that had been chapped by the cold and by other women's neglect for many winters. The kind of woman who, given a household to run, ran it the way she had been run herself, with neither pleasure nor invention. "You are the assistant from the agency." "I am. Name, Anne Carver." "Anne Carver, you will go where you are sent. You will not be seen above stairs unless I send you there. You will not eat with the upper staff. You will not speak unless addressed. The young mistress dislikes older women's voices. Practice not having one. The older mistress dislikes everything. Do not give her a target. Bag. I beg your pardon. Your bag. Give it to me. I keep it until your duties end. We have had 3 thefts since Christmas, none of them by senior staff." The Duchess handed over the small case. Mrs. Phelps opened it on the small table inside the door. She glanced at the change of linen, the hairbrush, the worn prayer book that had been Edward's mother's and that Adelaide had carried for 35 years. "You bring a prayer book to a country house party. I have not been parted from it in many years." Mrs. Phelps snapped the case shut. She set it on a shelf behind the door. "You will come with me. We have lost the time you wasted on the road. I cannot recover it. I can, however, charge it to your day. Yes, Mrs. Phelps." The Duchess of Ravensworth, currently the woman known as Anne Carver, stepped over the threshold of Thornbury Hall and into the corridor that had been waiting for her since the autumn. The door closed behind her. The brougham, which had been paid in advance and which had been instructed not to wait, turned in the small gravel yard and rattled away. The corridor inside the servants' entrance ran below the level of the main floor for the length of the entire south wing, whitewashed at the top, gray at shoulder height where aprons had brushed for years. The air carried the particular compound smell of houses that prepared for guests of a kind they were not used to. Burnt sugar from a pastry that had gone over, brass polish. The acrid trace of women working without rest since, before dawn. Mrs. Phelps walked ahead. She did not look back to see whether the new assistant was keeping up. The new assistant kept up. The first room they entered was the back kitchen. 3 large copper pans were boiling on the range. A boy of perhaps 10 was turning a roasting fork. A scullery girl was scaling a pile of mackerel that would not, by the smell of them, survive until the dinner course tomorrow. A woman in a flour-dusted apron was at the long table separating eggs into 2 earthenware bowls, with the precision of a Welsh chapel singer cutting hymn pages. Tremaine, the new assistant from the agency. Carver. She will be used wherever there is a hand short. You will tell her what to do. You will not feed her unless I authorize it. The cook did not look up. Right you are. Mrs. Phelps, Carver. The flowers in the upper corridor need water changed. You will find the buckets in the back scullery. Do not slop on the runners. The mistress has counted every runner in the upper hall this morning.
"Yes, Mrs. Phelps."
Then move. The Duchess moved. She found the back scullery. She filled 2 enamel buckets at the long stone sink. She carried them up the back stair, which was narrow and worn at the center of each tread by the same shoes that had been climbing it since the year of the Queen's coronation. She emptied the dirty water from the floral arrangements on the upper landing, replaced it with fresh, dried the small puddle on the table beneath the first bowl with the edge of her own apron, and turned to come down again. In the time it had taken her to climb the stairs, she had memorized three things: the position of the linen cupboard, the narrow passage that ran behind the great drawing room, the angle of the small window above that looked out over the rear garden and the kitchen yard. She came down. The bell rack above the kitchen door rang twice in the space of 1 minute. Bell 9. Bell 9. Cordelia's dressing room had decided it needed something else. Mrs. Tremaine lifted her head once. She lowered it again. Whitcomb. The young mistress, yes, Mrs. Tremaine. A girl of perhaps 19 rose from a corner of the kitchen where she had been polishing a tray. She took the tray with her. She passed the new assistant on the way out. The new assistant did not at first look at her. The new assistant was carrying the empty enamel buckets back to the scullery. The girl who had taken the tray paused in the doorway. She looked at the new assistant once. She did not look again. She went up the back stair. The Tunditas had not in that moment paid the girl any attention. She had been counting bells. The bell rack listed bells for 31 rooms. She had memorized the sequence by the time she had reached the scullery. She had served at meetings of the parish council in 1903. She had a memory built for systems. The next 2 hours of her afternoon were given over to tasks that had been assigned to no one because they had not been thought worth assigning. She refilled 3 bowls of pot pourri in the front passages. She dusted the curve of the banister of the front stair, an action no one had performed since November, because the staff who had been assigned the front banister had been moved the previous month to inventory the linen for the spring cleaning. She trimmed the wicks of the candles on the small hall table that no one had been expected to light tonight. She did all of it without being told a second time. She did all of it in a way that did not draw attention to itself. What no one in the house understood, as they passed the older woman in the dark dress and gave her the work no one wanted, was that they had begun to be remembered, not by name, not yet, by something smaller, by the angle of the cook's shoulders when the housekeeper passed her, which dropped half an inch each time, by the way the under-butler set down a glass when he had been drinking and did not want it noticed, by the small sigh the boy of 10 gave when he carried a stack-a-lot of plates from the back kitchen to the breakfast room, the sigh of a child who had been told once too often that morning that his work was incorrect. The Duchess of Ravensworth had spent her life being attended to. She had not, for the better part of 3 decades, been the one who attended. It was a different country, this country. She had read about it. She had sent out to 2 newspapers that wrote about it. She had given money to the people who tried to improve it. She had not, in all that subscribing and that giving, lived in it for an afternoon. She lived in it now. She watched the Welsh cook send back a sauce boat to the under-butler, with the small, precise contempt of a woman who knew her sauces and knew that he had skimmed the wine she had asked him for. She watched the boy of 10 get clipped on the ear for stepping on the edge of the housekeeper's foot. She watched a young footman, no older than 17, freeze for a full 5 seconds in the corridor as Hortense Blackwood passed him, because he had been instructed not to be visible in her line of sight, and she appeared from a direction he had not expected. She thought a thing she had not thought aloud in many years. She thought, I have allowed myself in the management of my own large house to assume that what I do not see does not happen. I have been wrong. The not seeing is, in fact, the place where it happens most. The thought stayed with her. She carried it as she carried the buckets, the trays, the small bowls of pot pourri. By the time the long case clock in the front hall struck 4, she had moved through 6 rooms, 3 corridors, and 2 stairs. She had been spoken to by name twice. She had been spoken to without name 11 times. She had been ignored 34. None of it had caused her to lower her chin further than the slight angle she had decided upon at the wardrobe in her own dressing room that morning. At 4:15, Mrs. Phelps stopped her in the lower corridor. You, take this basket of cut flowers to the stillroom. Whitcomb will arrange them. Tell her. The mistress wants them on the breakfast table by 5:30. If she asks why, the answer is that the mistress wants them on the breakfast table by 5:30. Yes, Mrs. Phelps, and do not loiter in the stillroom. Whitcomb is slow. Do not encourage her. No, Mrs. Phelps. She carried the basket down the lower corridor and through the small door that led to the stillroom. The stillroom of Thornbury Hall had been built to make jam and preserve fruit in. It had not been built to be cheerful, a low ceiling. A pair of small windows that looked out over the kitchen garden. A long worktop covered in zinc. Shelves on 3 walls bearing rows of stoneware. Jars of preserves, pickles, and conserves from the previous autumn, each labeled in a careful hand that was not Mrs. Phelps's. The girl at the worktop was Whitcomb. The new assistant had passed her in the kitchen doorway 2 hours before. The girl was peeling the lower stems of a bundle of late white narcissi. Mrs. Phelps says these are for the breakfast table by 5:30. Yes. The Duchess set down the basket. She did not turn at once to leave. She was permitted by Mrs. Phelps's instructions to deliver the basket and depart. She was not, by Mrs. Phelps's instructions, permitted to remain in the stillroom. She had been told not to encourage the slowness of the girl. She turned. She paused at the door. She turned back. The girl had set down her small knife on the zinc worktop. She had her 2 hands flat on the worktop beside the knife. Her shoulders were lifted just enough to indicate that she had been preparing, for the last 40 seconds, to say something she had not yet been allowed by her own breath to begin. Carver. Yes, that is not your name. The Duchess did not deny it. The denial would have cost her the girl. She had learned, over the course of the long afternoon, that the only currency available to her with the staff of this house was the truth. The truth was the only thing they had not been routinely lied to about. It is a name I have been asked to use today. I have seen you before. You have. 2 winters ago, at the mission hall behind the police station in Whitechapel. You came in with a basket of oranges and a basket of pears. The matron told us afterward that we had served tea to a duchess. I was 16. I did not believe her. I have remembered your face since. The Duchess crossed back to the worktop. She picked up the small knife the girl had set down. She began, without explanation, to trim the lower stems of the narcissi with the small, precise motion of a woman who had done such things in her own greenhouses since the age of 9. Why did you not believe the matron? Because a duchess would not have looked at me. The Duchess we had been told about lived in a kind of house I had only seen in books. Duchesses did not bring fruit. Duchesses did not look at the girls who served the tea. You were wrong about the duchesses you had been told about. I have noticed that today, the Duchess set down the trimmed narcissus on the zinc. She picked up another. She did not look at the girl. The girl was easier to talk to when neither of them was watching the other. What is your name? Eliza Whitcomb. They call me Whitcomb in the house. My mother called me Eliza. Where is your mother? Buried. 3 years ago. The influenza. And your aunt sent me here. She did the best she could with the choice she had. I do not blame her for it. How are you treated? I am treated the way the mistress thinks an aunt's niece ought to be treated, which is to say, the mistress did not pay for me. She does not believe she is required to consider me. And the young mistress, the girl looked down at the worktop. Her chip-toothed mouth made the smallest motion the Duchess had ever seen a young woman's mouth make. Not a frown, not a flinch, a registration of a fact. The young mistress notices me only when there is something for her to be displeased about. Eliza, yes, I am going to tell you the truth. I am going to ask you, in return, to trust me without further explanation today. The trust will be repaid. I cannot, at this moment, tell you how. I can tell you only that you have nothing to lose by giving it. Are you able to listen? Yes, I have come to this house because I have suspected for some months that the young mistress is not who she has been presenting herself to be. I have come to see for myself. I have seen enough. There will be consequences for the family that owns this house. The consequences will arrive by tomorrow evening. You're not going to be in this house when they arrive." The girl set down a Narcissus very slowly. "Where am I going? You are going to my house. By a motor that will leave Thornbury at the same hour as I do. You will be at Ravensworth Manor. Before midnight, you will be given a room. You will be given the choice of what to do with the next 10 years of your life. I will give you the choice. I will not make it for you. The choice will not be made tomorrow. We will discuss it when you are warm and rested and have eaten. Why me? Because I saw you in the kitchen this afternoon, when the housekeeper struck the back of your neck with the corner of her ledger, and you did not allow yourself to react, and I noticed that you were the only person in the room who had not laughed at the boy of 10 when he had dropped the plates that morning. Because in a house of liars, the person who is kind to the smallest is the person who has chosen by themselves to be true. Because I have learned slowly that loyalty is not given by people who are paid. Loyalty is given by people who have been seen. I have seen you. I am asking now to be seen in return." The girl's hands had gone still on the worktop. She did not weep. She had, by some long-trained discipline, learned not to weep when she had been touched by a kindness. She had learned not to weep. She had once told her aunt, because the housekeeper of any household she had been placed in would have used the weeping against her, and a girl in service could not afford to give her employers a weapon to use against her. She nodded once. "Eliza. Yes. There is one more thing. I do not yet know what kind of trouble I will encounter in the next few hours. If at any point in the afternoon you witness something that you believe I would wish to know about, you will find a way to bring it to me. A scrap of paper, a spoken sentence in a quiet hallway, anything. Do not act on it yourself. Do not be brave on my behalf. Be useful on my behalf. The two are not the same thing. Yes, your grace, not your grace. Anne, a clock somewhere above them in the house struck the half hour. The narcissi on the zinc worktop had been trimmed for the breakfast table at 28 minutes past. The girl picked up the small knife and began the next bundle. The Duchess walked back along the lower corridor. The corridor was empty. She stopped at the foot of the back stair and pressed 2 fingers against the cool stone of the wall. Briefly. She had been Anne Carver for 6 hours. She would be Anne Carver for 16 more. The interior part of her that had begun to believe this afternoon that she had been wrong about the world she lived in would have to be folded away until tomorrow morning. There was no time for it tonight. There was only time for the work. She straightened the apron at her waist. She went back to the kitchen. The bell for Cordelia's dressing room rang at 3 minutes to 12. Mrs. Tremaine lifted her head from a copper pot of consommé. "Carver, the young mistress. Fresh tea. Hurry." "Yes, Mrs. Tremaine." The tray was prepared in less than a minute. 3 porcelain cups, because the young mistress had instructed that she always be given the option of pouring for any of her maids. The instruction was a piece of theater. The young mistress had never poured for one. The cups were a courtesy to her own self-image. A small jug of milk, a sugar bowl, a teapot. The Duchess picked up the tray. She climbed the back stair. At the top of the stair, the upper corridor ran the length of the south wing. A Turkish runner had been laid down the center, a pier glass at one end, a bowl of late hothouse roses on a small table. Late hothouse roses were Cordelia's preference for the upper corridor, because she had been informed by an article in a magazine that women of refinement chose flowers that did not naturally grow in their gardens at that time of year. The Duchess walked the length of the runner toward the dressing room. The dressing room door was ajar. Sounds inside. A maid's voice asking a question. Cordelia's answer. Low, instructional. The small click of a pin being placed. She set the tray down on the small table by the door. She turned the handle. She entered. The dressing room was lit by 3 sconces and the high north window. The photographer hired for the engagement portrait was setting up his equipment in the next room. He had been told that the morning light alone would not do for Miss Blackwood's particular complexion. He had not contradicted this. He had been paid in advance. Cordelia was at the dressing table, two maids on either side of her, a third at her feet adjusting the hem of the new pale gown. She was working, with the seriousness of a violinist tuning before a concert on her face. First surprise, the expression of a young woman who could not quite believe a man as desirable as Theodore had chosen her. Too eager, she softened the eyes, practiced it again. Better, then. Gratitude, the expression deployed when one was being given a piece of jewelry, just enough surprise to flatter the giver. Not so much that one looked unprepared. Then, modest concern. The expression of a young woman, so genuinely worried about the welfare of the working classes that she occasionally said things at dinner that gave strong men hope for the future of the country. She tried each in sequence, adjusted each, tried again. She did not look up when the new assistant entered. Set it there. Do not breathe on it. Yes, miss. The Duchess set the tray down at the precise spot indicated. She withdrew. She had been in the room for 19 seconds. She had taken in the angle of the mirror, the expressions on the dressing table. The way Cordelia's left hand kept rising to touch the pearls at her throat. The small, unconscious motion of a woman who needed reassurance that the costume was holding. She was halfway back along the runner when the dressing room door opened behind her. Cordelia emerged. The pale gown moved around the body inside it, the way water moves around a stone. The hem was longer than the corridor was designed for. The corridor was 4 feet wide at its narrowest point. The Duchess had been carrying the empty teapot back to the kitchen. She stepped sideways at the narrowing of the corridor, with the small, efficient motion of a maid who had stepped sideways for many such gowns in many such corridors before. The toe of her shoe brushed the very tip of the hem. Cordelia stopped. The Duchess did not look up at her face. She did not need to. The face would have been the face she had practiced in the mirror an hour before. She kept her own face arranged at the angle she had chosen at her wardrobe that morning. There was a small breath of silk against the floor there. Then the hand. The slap was the slap she had been preparing herself to receive since she had stepped down from the brougham. The previous afternoon, it was sharper than she had braced for. It was not as loud as she had imagined. The teapot in her hand did not move. She had 30 years of practice in not moving teapots. Her cheek went hot. The hand at her side did not lift to her cheek. You filthy creature. Do not touch what you could never afford. The Duchess lowered her chin half an inch. Then she lifted it again, just to the place it had been before the slap. She did not weep. She did not apologize. It was the recovery that infuriated Cordelia. She swept past with the small, ferocious sigh of a young woman who had not yet learned that contempt was a poor instrument against a person who had nothing further to lose to it. The Duchess heard the dressing room door close again. She did not move at once. She held the empty teapot and waited until her breath had settled. The mark on the cheek would fade in 2 hours. It would be replaced by something else. The something else was not visible. It would not ever be visible. It would be carried internally for the rest of an afternoon, then placed, with the rest of the afternoon's evidence, in a small, careful drawer of her mind that she had been keeping for matters of this kind since the death of her husband. A small sound at the end of the corridor. Eliza. The girl that Ben had bring a basin of warm water from the laundry to the second floor. She had stopped at the top of the back stair when the slap had landed. She was holding the basin with both hands. Her face was the color of an overcast morning. She crossed the runner without making a sound. Why, what? Why did you not strike her back? You could. I would have. The Duchess adjusted the gloves at her wrists. The gloves were the cheap cotton she had drawn on at her dressing room that morning. The wedding band on its silver chain, against her chest, had not moved during the slap because some debts grow larger when left unpaid. The young mistress has just doubled hers, and she does not yet know it. The girl's hands tightened on the basin. Tell me what you need. Take the basin to wherever you were taking it. Come down to the kitchen in 10 minutes by the front stair, not the back. Walk slowly. Do not look at anyone. There will be a small thing I need you to do." Yes, the Duchess carried the empty teapot back along the runner. She passed the bowl of late hothouse roses on the small table. She descended the back stair to the kitchen. She returned the teapot to the back kitchen scullery. She did not, in any of the 4 minutes it took her to do this, allow the angle of her chin to alter from the position she had set that morning. In the kitchen, she picked up a basket of small linen napkins that had been folded badly by a junior maid and would need to be refolded before the evening meal. She carried the basket to the linen room. She began to refold them. The mark on her cheek faded by half. She would, by 4:30, be the only one in the house who could still feel it. The motor car arrived at Thornbury Hall at 11 minutes past 1. The boy at the gate had been told to listen for it. He listened. He ran the news up the gravel drive to the side door. The side door ran it to the kitchen. The kitchen ran it to Mrs. Phelps. Mrs. Phelps clapped her hands once. The household assembled itself with the speed of a regiment that had been waiting for the bugle. Hortense Blackwood emerged from the morning room in a fresh gown. Cordelia descended from the dressing room with the small final adjustment of a pearl at her throat. The expression on her face was the one she had been working on at the dressing table. Tender delight with a thread of gentle surprise. She had it now. She had finally caught it. The Duchess took her place in the shadow of the back staircase with a small dustpan in her hand and a rag she did not intend to use. She had been told to wait there by Mrs. Phelps. She had been told to be invisible to any line of sight from the front hall. She had been told not to lift her face above the height of the lowest banister rail. She had taken the position obediently. From it, she could see the front hall and the lower steps. She could not be seen by anyone who did not deliberately look down at the floor to look for her. The front doors were opened. Theodore stepped out of the motor car, smiling. He had not seen her in 3 weeks. He was wearing the dark gray coat she had given him for his 27th birthday. His hair had been cut too short on one side. He had not noticed. He never noticed his hair. He carried a bouquet of cream roses, tied with a silver ribbon, because somebody had once told him that Cordelia preferred them. He did not know that somebody had been Cordelia. She came down the front steps, as though the polished wood were water. She kissed his cheek. She accepted the roses. She turned, in full view of the entire household, toward the frightened staff drawn up beside the front door. "You poor dears, you must have been running yourselves ragged. Do please rest when you can." A maid in the line nearly dropped a small salver. Mrs. Phelps caught her wrist before the metal could ring against the floor. Mrs. Phelps smiled at Cordelia. Cordelia smiled at the staff. Theodore beamed at all of them. He passed within 4 feet of his mother in the shadow of the back staircase. He did not look down. He did not see the older woman with the dustpan. He did not see the faint pink rimsriddle slap on the cheek of the older woman with the dustpan. He did not see that the older woman, who had failed for 1/2 second to keep her face fully arranged, was watching him with the expression of a person being unmade quietly by a single passing form. It is the privilege of mothers to be known across crowded rooms. It is a privilege we do not name until the day it is taken away. She felt the loss of it now, not as anger, as a kind of cold under the skin that had nothing to do with the temperature in the marble hall. Lunch was served at 1:30. The dining room had been arranged by a woman who had read 3 articles in the wrong magazine. Roses every 2 feet down the long table. The good silver. A great epergne in the center that Hortense had bought at an estate sale, and had been told by the dealer was Georgian. It was not Georgian. It was a copy from 1908. The dealer had retired to Worthing on the strength of the sale for quartzes, a clear consommé, pie, veal and cream. Asparagus the cook had been forced to send back twice for being insufficiently arranged. A salmon mousse that had begun to sweat under the chandelier. a small lemon ice for the clothes. The Duchess and 3 other staff served. She passed within an arm's length of her son 4 separate times during the meal. He did not look at the woman handing him his wine glass. Why should he? He had not looked at the woman handing him his wine glass since he had been weaned. The look was not in his repertoire. She watched him laugh easily at one of Hortense's heavily prepared observations. She watched the way Cordelia placed her right hand on the table, palm down, the small fingers just enough to suggest that they were waiting for someone to take them. She watched Hortense direct the conversation toward a list of mutual acquaintances she had been instructed to introduce into the talk by exactly 2:30. After the 4th course, the gentlemen withdrew to the library for cigars. The ladies retreated to the conservatory at the back of the house for coffee. The conservatory door did not close properly. A panel had warped in the heat the previous summer and had not been replaced. The Duchess carried out a tray of glasses by the rear route. The rear route passed the conservatory door. She set the tray down on a side table. She adjusted a glass. She listened. Hortense's voice, low, confiding. The voice of a woman who had been waiting all morning to drop her shoulders. He has not asked his own solicitor to look at the settlement figure. He has not, Vera. He trusts that he is in love. There has been no man more easily managed in this country since the end of the war, and the mother will be settled. In Kent. The old place at Marston Brook. Gardens. Fresh air, a small permanent staff. She has not been there since 1911. She will not be displeased. Old women like quiet country houses. I discover of it later, but later is no longer our concern. A small laugh. Then Cordelia's voice. A half-tone lower than the one she used at table. The voice she had not yet learned to disguise from people she believed were not in the room. And the Vienna matter. Hush. There is no one here. Mother. The girls do not understand a syllable of it. The Duchess did not move. She was the girl. The girl in this room was anyone who did not understand a syllable. He has written again. He says the man in the city is no longer willing to wait. Then we will give him a date. Once the engagement is announced, your Mr. Crow may take the announcement to a banker in Cheapside and use it to obtain a bridge against the marriage settlement. The banker is Mr. Levin. He has been spoken to. He is willing, and then we sell the portraits, quietly. There is a dealer in Paris. The dealer does not ask questions about provenance. The Ravensworth ancestors will hang on the wall of some Midwestern American who has never heard of Ravensworth, and we will be in better weather than England before the rain is stopped. And the boy will weep, will recover. The boy is not the difficulty. The boy is the instrument. The difficulty is the timeline. We must have the engagement announced by the 1st of June, or we will lose the man in the city, and the man in the city is the one we cannot lose. Cordelia's voice, smaller now. Crow. Crow is in love with you. Crow will wait as long as you ask. You may have noticed in your short career that men in love are the only kind of men who do what they are told. A laugh between mother and daughter. The Duchess set down the tray. She moved on. She did not pause. She did not allow herself to pause. She was the woman who had been brought in for the day from an agency. She had been told to carry the glass to the back pantry. She had been told nothing else. She walked at the pace a woman in that situation would walk. She arrived at the pantry. She set the glasses down on the deal table. She placed her 2 hands flat on the table for one breath. She straightened. The principle Edward had taught her in their 2nd year of marriage had not changed in 35 years. Anger was a luxury. Information was a tool. An enemy who believed she was unobserved was an enemy who would, given time, lay down her own weapons in front of you. She had her information now. She had everything she had come for. She had it earlier than she had expected. She had 9 hours and 47 minutes before the household motors of Ravensworth were due to turn through the iron gate of Thornbury Hall. She had work to do in the 9 hours. She picked up a basket of small linen napkins that had been left on the table by a junior maid. and walked back along the lower corridor toward the linen room. She walked the length of the lower corridor, with the basket of napkins balanced against her hip. The napkins did not need refolding, but the basket was a useful object to be seen carrying. A woman in a house at war with itself required, above everything else, a reason to be where she was at every instant of the afternoon. She did not look up when the footsteps came around the corner of the passage ahead of her. The footsteps were Theodore's. He had been at the door of the library, having taken leave of the cousin no one knew, and Mr. Frederick Blackwood, who had come down from London for the occasion and had not yet been told anything that would have changed his enjoyment of a glass of port. Theodore had been on his way back to the conservatory by the side passage because he disliked passing through the morning room when Cordelia was not yet in it. He had been thinking, as he walked, of the exact wording he meant to use when he proposed. He had drafted the wording over the soup and refined it during the salmon. He was almost satisfied with it. He came around the corner. He saw the older woman with the basket of napkins. He did not properly see her. He saw the shape of her, the carriage of the shoulders, the angle of the head, tipped slightly downward in the way that the female staff of his own household tipped their heads when they passed him in his own corridors at home. He slowed. It was the smell that did it. The smell was not perfume. She was not wearing perfume. She had given up perfume that morning, along with her rings. But beneath the dust of the day's work, beneath the cooking smells from the kitchens, beneath the polish that had been applied to the runner that morning, there was a faint trace of the particular soap she used. The soap had been made by a small house in Jermyn Street since 1841. It carried a thin scent of bay and clove. Edward had bought her the first bar of it in the summer they had been engaged. She had never used any other soap since Theodore's nose registered the bay and clove. His conscious mind did not register what his nose had told it. His conscious mind was on the salmon and the wording of the proposal, and the way the light had fallen on Cordelia's hair at lunch. But his feet slowed. He paused, perhaps a yard from the woman with the basket. He opened his mouth. Almost, he said something. The almost said word had no shape. It had only the breath that precedes a name a man has not used in 3 weeks because he has been busy being someone else. The Duchess did not turn her face. She continued past. The basket of napkins continued past with her. A second of his hesitation lengthened. He frowned. He blinked. He almost called the word, Theo. The voice from the conservatory door 12 feet behind him, Cordelia, leaning out, holding her coffee cup in one hand, the small finger of her other hand catching at the pearls at her throat. The expression on her face was now lightly impatient. Tenderly impatient. She had a particular voice for moments at which her attention had been kept waiting. He turned, with the small spring of a man who has been called back out from somewhere he had nearly arrived. The frown left his face. The bay and clove left his nose. The almost word died in his throat as he had been trained, by 28 years of life as a man of his standing, to permit such words to die. He smiled. He walked on, toward the conservatory, toward the woman who had practiced her impatience for him in a mirror an hour before, a small mercy of distance. He did not look back. The Duchess of Ravensworth carried the basket of napkins to the linen room, set it down, placed her 2 hands flat against the cold stone of the windowsill, and breathed once. A son's eyes can travel the length of a corridor. A mother sometimes lives at the end of it for years without being arrived at. She had been within a yard of him, twice today. He had not seen her any of the 3. The wound was no longer a wound. It was a small finished thing inside her, like a closed book on a shelf. She would, in due course, take the book down and read it. Not yet. Not today. There was a small sound at the door of the linen room behind her. Eliza, the girl, had something in her hand. She slipped it into the Duchess's palm, with the practiced furtiveness of a child passing notes in a schoolroom. The Duchess did not look at it at once. Where, under the mattress, the 3rd corner, I was changing her bedding for tomorrow. The mattress had been turned that morning, and the corner I found it under had not been turned in some time. How long since you put it back? I did not put it back. I took it with me. They will not miss it before tomorrow. They will not miss it. They turn the mattress only at the change of the linen, which is on a Wednesday. Today is a Friday, Eliza. Yes, you have just earned the rest of your education. She unfolded the small piece of paper in the cool half-shadow of the linen room. The hand was Sebastian Crow's. She had seen the hand once before. On the front of the photograph the colonel had brought her in February. It was a sloping, hurried hand. The hand of a man who did not waste paper. 3 more months and we will be free of this island. The cargo arrangement at the second port is confirmed. Bring all of it. The bonds. The small mahogany box from your grandmother. Any of the smaller pictures that will travel. The larger ones will go through Levin. Burn this when you have read it. I will meet you on the 8th at the inn at the second port. S. The signature was unmistakable. She folded the paper again. She slid it into the small pouch at her throat, beside the wedding band on its chain. Eliza, yes. You are not coming up the back stair after dark. Whatever you may hear in the front of the house this evening, you are going to remain in the still room with the cook. The cook has been told you are to assist her with the morning preparations. You are not, under any circumstance, to come into the front hall before I come for you. Are you able to obey this? Yes. Promise me. I promise. The girl turned. She slipped back along the corridor with the same practiced quietness. The Duchess took 2 more breaths against the stone of the windowsill. A clock somewhere above struck the half-hour. A long way down the avenue, beyond the iron gate, 3 motorcars had turned off the Guildford Road and were climbing in close formation toward front of the house. The engines were not yet audible inside the linen room, but they would be. The boy at the front gate heard the engines first. He had not been warned to expect anything more than the boy at the kitchen door had been warned. He had been told that a single guest had been expected after lunch, and that the single guest had arrived, and that the household had assembled and dispersed, and was now occupied with the next stage of the infant entertainment. He had been left at the front gate to watch the lane. The lane delivered 3 engines. He stood. He took off his cap. He held it against his chest. The lead motor slowed at the gate. The chauffeur, behind a peaked black cap and a pair of driving gloves the color of slate, leaned his head a half-inch toward the open window. Pass us through, lad. Yes, sir. The motor passed. The second followed. The third followed. The boy stood at the gate, with his cap against his chest for the full 40 seconds. It took the 3 motors to climb the avenue. In the front hall, the household had begun to register the sound. The footman at the doors was the first to lift his head. The cousin no one knew, in the morning room, paused mid-sentence and listened. Hortense, on her way back from a brief visit to her dressing room, stopped at the foot of the great staircase with one hand on the banister. Cordelia, on the upper landing, paused in front of the long pier glass. Theodore stepped out of the conservatory and into the marble hall with his eyebrows raised. Mother, did you arrange for additional motors? Hortense did not answer at once. She did not know what to answer. There must have been some confusion at the gate. There are 3. Yes. Yes, there appear to be 3. The footman at the doors looked across the hall at the housekeeper. The housekeeper looked across the hall at Hortense. Hortense did not return either look. She was watching the doors. The lead motor stopped at the foot of the front steps. A chauffeur opened the rear door. A man stepped down. Tall, silver-haired, black coat. White hair brushed straight back, gloves folded in his left hand. He did not, as he climbed the front steps, look at anyone in particular. He looked with the calm of a man who had attended too many ceremonies to be impressed by another one at the line where the marble of the front step met the polished oak of the entry floor. Theodore took 2 steps forward. He had not, for the first second, recognized the man. Then he had, Mr. Hargrove, my lord. Why are you here? That, my lord, is for her grace, to explain. Hortense made a small sound, not yet a word. A second motor stopped behind the first, a third behind that. Other men descended. The household secretary in his black coat, Colonel Ashworth in plain civilian dress, an older gentleman whose presence Theodore did not understand, and which the footman at the doors, after a quick reading of the cut of the man's suit, identified at once as official. The official gentleman did not climb the front steps. He waited at the foot. Mr. Hargrove crossed the threshold of Thornbury Hall. He did not stop to greet Hortense, though she was directly in his path with her hand still on the banister. He did not look at her. He walked past her. He walked past the cousin no one knew. He walked past Theodore. He walked the length of the marble hall, with the small, precise steps of a man who knew exactly where he was going, because he had been told where he was going at 6 the previous evening. In the cool half-shadow at the back of the marble hall, an older woman in a dark dress was standing with her cap still in place and her hands folded at her waist. She had walked there from the linen room in the last 40 seconds. Mr. Hargrove stopped 2 paces from her. He drew himself up. He bowed. It was the bow he had given exactly twice in his life. The first time was on the day he had entered the service of Edward Ravensworth. The second time was on the day he had been informed that Edward Ravensworth had died. "Your Grace." The marble of the hall absorbed the word. For 3 full seconds, no one in the front hall moved. It was Cordelia who saw the heir first. She was on the upper landing, 4 steps down from where she had been standing at the pier glass. She had begun to descend at the sound of the engines. She had stopped on the 4th step from the top, because what she had seen at the back of the marble hall had begun to organize itself in her mind into a shape she had been refusing all afternoon to identify. The hair beneath the cap, even at 30 feet of distance, was a particular hair. Silver at the temples, coiled neatly at the nape. It was the hair from the framed photograph in her mother's morning room, which her mother had bought at a charity raffle in 1919 and had been pretending, ever since, was an heirloom. A sound escaped Cordelia's throat that was not a word. Hortense turned slowly. She had not yet seen what her daughter had seen, but she had heard her daughter, and she had been a mother for 24 years, and she knew the sound of a daughter discovering the cost of something her mother had taught her to do. The Duchess of Ravensworth reached up. She unpinned the small white cap from her hair. She handed it, without ceremony, to Mr. Hargrove. He took it. He did not, for the moment, do anything with it. He stood and held it as a man holds a folded napkin. She unfastened the rough collar of the dark dress beneath. The dress was still a dress of service, but the woman inside it was no longer. She turned half a degree to her right. Her eyes met Hortense's. There was nothing in them. No anger, no triumph, no invitation. The eyes of a woman who had been observed enough that afternoon to last her a long winter, and who had chosen, at the close of the observation, not to express anything until she had decided what she would do with what she had observed. "Mrs. Blackwood." Hortense could not answer. Her mouth was open. Her left hand had risen from the banister and was suspended in the air, at the level of her own throat, in the strange, small gesture of a woman who had been about to fix her collar and had forgotten what a collar was for. "Your daughter strikes carelessly." As a piece of household information, it is worth knowing. The Duchess lifted one gloved hand and touched the faint pink remainder on her own cheek. The mark was almost gone now. It did not need to be visible. Every person in the marble hall could see exactly where it had been. Theodore had not moved. He was holding the brass handle of the conservatory door behind him. The brass had been cool when he took hold of it. It was warm now by the heat of his palm. He understood, for the first time since lunch, that something he had been refusing to understand all day was about to become impossible to refuse. His voice came out, cracked. "Mother." She did not answer him yet. She had not finished speaking to the room. Inspector Garrick, the official gentleman who had been waiting at the foot of the front steps, climbed them now. He came through the open doors, plain dark suit, a face that did not show emotion at the furniture of country houses. A small leather case in his hand. Your Grace, you have the warrant. I have it. The constable at Folkestone has been alerted. The boat at the second port will not sail without our man on it. We expect to make the arrest before midnight, and the matter at Vienna is no longer a matter for the yard, Your Grace. The papers have been forwarded to the appropriate office at the Treasury. The collateral the gentleman in Vienna believes himself to be holding will be assessed by Friday. Thank you, Inspector. Hortense sat. The sitting was not a choice. Her niece had refused to continue carrying her. She had sat on the third step from the bottom of the great staircase, and her satin gown had collapsed around her like a tent whose central pole had snapped. She did not look at her daughter. Her daughter had not looked at her since the cap had come off. Cordelia, on the upper landing, had not moved either. It was the immobility of a woman who had been performing composure her entire life and who had just discovered, at 24, that composure was a quality the body lost first. The Duchess turned to the line of household staff at the back of the marble hall. They had been assembled there since the sound of the second motor. They were ranged shoulder to shoulder against the paneling. None of them lifted their eyes. None of them could. You are not in trouble. You are not in trouble for anything that has happened in this house in the last 6 hours, nor for anything that has happened in the last 6 months. The inspector will speak with each of you privately this evening. You will tell the truth as you understand it. You will not be punished for any truth you tell. Mrs. Phelps, Your Grace, you will provide the inspector with the accounts book. You will provide him with the records of the dismissals of the last 12 months. You will provide him, in particular, with the small ficum. In the bottomed mar, in drawer of the desk, in your private sitting room, in which you have written down the names of the families, of the staff, and the conditions under which you might dismiss each of them. The notebook will be returned to you. You will not be required to remain in this house. After Friday, Mrs. Phelps had begun to cry. She had not cried since 1909. She did not know she was crying now. The Duchess produced, from the small pouch at her throat, the folded scrap of paper. Eliza had pressed it to her hand in the linen room. She did not hand it to the inspector. She did not need to. He had a copy of his own, intercepted weeks before General Postus. Against the day he might require it, she held the scrap up. Her arm was steady. This was taken from your bedroom this afternoon, Miss Blackwood, from beneath the mattress. The handwriting will be matched to that of Mr. Sebastian Crow by Monday. The cargo arrangement referenced in it will be matched on the same day to a manifest the inspector's colleagues have already retrieved from a shipping office in Liverpool. The plan referenced in the second sentence will be matched to the conversation you had with your mother in the conservatory between 2 and 2:30 this afternoon, which was overheard by a member of staff. There will be no part of your arrangement that is not, by Friday next, written down somewhere with the date and the witness. She lowered the scrap. I do not say this to humiliate you. I say it because I would like you to understand. Today, while there is still time for the understanding to do you any good, the world is not the smaller of the two rooms you have been performing in. It is the larger room, and in the larger room, there are women who have been watching you all along. Cordelia did not answer. Her hand had risen, slowly, to the pearls at her throat. The pearls did not catch the light at all now. They had decided, at some moment in the previous minute, to stop pretending. The Duchess turned her head, finally, to her son. He was still holding the brass handle of the conservatory door. He looked at the distance of 20 feet, like a man who had not slept in 3 nights. Theodore, mother, you will go to the green motor at the front of the line. You will not speak to anyone in this hall on the way. You will not look at the woman on the staircase. You will wait. I will come to you in 5 minutes. Do you understand? Yes. He let go of the brass handle. He walked the length of the marble hall. He did not look at Cordelia. He could not have looked at Cordelia if he had wanted to. He passed within 2 feet of where Hortense was mask collapsed on the third step from the bottom. He did not look at her either. He went out through the open doors. He descended the front steps with the slow, careful step of a man who had been told by his own legs that he was not yet to be trusted with his full weight. He climbed into the green motor. He sat. He did not move. The Duchess turned back to Hortense Blackwood. Mrs. Blackwood, mercy, your grace. Mercy, I have been a foolish mother. I have been an ambitious one. My daughter is my only child. My son is mine. We are equal in only that, your grace, I beg you. There will be no further conversation between us this evening. Any conversation will be conducted by my solicitor and your bank. The loans extended to this house, through 3 intermediary firms financed by the Ravensworth estate, will be called in by Friday. The title of your family will be referred to the College of Arms by Monday. The London papers will receive a full and accurate account of this afternoon by Tuesday. You may use the days before then as you wish. She turned. She did not bow. She did not say goodbye to the cousin, no one knew, or to Mr. Frederick Blackwood, who had emerged at last from the library with a glass of port in his hand and the unfortunate expression who had been told something he had been refusing to be told for 19 years. She did not look up at Cordelia. On the landing, she walked the length of the marble hall and out through the front doors and down the front steps her son had descended a minute before. She got into the lead motor. The chauffeur closed the door. The 3 motors turned in the gravel circle. The second motor paused at the front steps for 30 seconds to receive a small frightened young woman with a battered carpet bag, whom Mr. Hargrove had handed up from the kitchen yard by the side passage. The young woman did not look at the footman, who closed the door for her. The footman did not look at her either. The third motor swung in behind the first 2. Thornbury Hall was alone with itself. The London papers reported the affair on the Tuesday morning. They used the phrasing the better papers used when a story would keep its readers for 3 weeks. A regrettable misunderstanding at a Surrey house. A young woman of recent prominence whose situation had altered. The names were not on the front pages. They did not need to be. By Wednesday breakfast, every dressmaker in Bruton Street had postponed Cordelia's fittings. By Thursday, 2 grand dinners at which Hortense had been the principal hostess had been quietly transferred to other women. By Friday, the bank had called in the notes on Thornbury Hall, and Mr. Levin of Cheapside had returned, very politely and very quickly, the documents Mrs. Blackwood had been discussing with him in February. The College of Arms confirmed the patent had been improperly granted in late June. The reporting was minimal. The consequence was complete. Sebastian Crowe was arrested at a public house in Folkestone, where he had been waiting for the boat that was not coming. He had ordered a second because he had been informed the boat was running an hour late. The constable arrived before the second glass. He served 7 years. He had time in those years to compose a number of letters he never sent. The gentleman in Vienna, who had no further reason to be patient, sent a letter to Mrs. Blackwood. The letter arrived at an address she no longer lived at. By the date written on the envelope, Mrs. Blackwood was in 2 small rooms in Tunbridge Wells, under a slight variation of her maiden name. She would die there, of pneumonia, 9 years later, in the second hospital in the county. Cordelia was not seen in London society for the rest of the year. She had hoped, in the early weeks, for an invitation from somewhere. The invitations did not come. She had counted in November on a small set of friendships she had not yet understood were not friendships, but mutual usefulness. The usefulness had been recalled. She lived eventually in a small lodging house off Bayswater Road. She would lie awake some nights and try to remember exactly the face of the woman she had struck in the corridor at Thornbury. She could not remember the face. She could only remember the absence of fear in it. These were the costs. They had been named for her 3 months before by a woman she had not bothered to look at twice. Theodore did not return to Ravensworth Manor that night. The Duchess had instructed him in the back seat of the green motor as it had carried them up out of Surrey, in the gathering dark, that she could not yet bear the sound of his footsteps in her own house. He had not argued. He had nodded once. He had been driven to his rooms at the Albany. He had let himself in. He had not turned on the lamps. He had sat in the dark for a long time. At 11, he had lit one lamp. He had walked into his study. He had sat at the small writing desk in the long, narrow room, with the tall window that looked out over the courtyard. The corner of the desk on his right hand carried three things, as it had, months for month: small leather frame with the photograph of his father at the age of 40, the green serpentine paperweight he had bought at Lizard Point, and, under the paperweight, the sealed envelope addressed in his father's hand. He had not moved any of the three objects in many weeks. He moved the paperweight now. He picked up the envelope. He held it for a long moment without breaking the seals. He had been afraid of it for some hours. He had not, until tonight, allowed himself to use the word. He broke the seal. The paper inside was a single sheet, folded into thirds. The writing covered both sides. The hand was Edward's, slightly less steady than Theodore remembered. It had been written, he understood at once, near the end. It began without ceremony, Theodore. I am writing this on a quiet afternoon in October. You are 22. You are upstairs asleep because you have walked the long way from the station in the wet and you are tired. The doctor I have engaged to see me on Tuesday will tell me, in front of your mother, what I already know. I will not be alive when you are 28. I am writing this letter because I will not be able to tell you in person what I would tell you on the day you read it. He stopped reading. He put the letter face down on the desk. He breathed. He picked it up again. When I was your age now, I had a year that nearly took the rest of me with it. There was a young woman. She was beautiful in a way that had been arranged. She paid me attention in a way that had been arranged. I am not certain, even now, that I would not have married her. I am only certain that I did not. The reason I did not was a single observation my own father made to me. On a morning I was going up to town. He said, "Watch how she treats the people from whom she expects nothing." I did not understand why he had said it until I had occasion to observe what he had asked me to observe. The occasion took me by surprise. The lesson did not. I broke the engagement on my own initiative the next week. It was the first decision I had ever made as an adult that I was proud of, and I want you to know that I needed to be told what to look at. I did not see it on my own. I want you to know also that I am not writing this letter from a higher place than the one you are standing in. I am writing it from where you are standing. But the only difference between us is the years I have had to recover. Theodore put his hand to his mouth. I am going to ask you three things. I am not going to make you. I have never made you do anything important. I have only ever asked. The first, whatever has happened by the time you are reading this, do not blame your mother. She has been watching since long before you noticed. She has been waiting longer. She has carried this family alone for years before I gave her any help with it. And she has carried it without you and without me since the year I went into the ground. She did not earn the loneliness she is in tonight. I gave it to her. She will not say so to you, because she is the kind of woman who does not say so. You are the only person left to whom she might consider saying so. Show her that you are old enough to hear it. The second, spend the next year doing work for which there is no audience. Not the work that puts your name in the papers, the work that does not. Find a tenant who is repairing his own roof in February. Lift the other end of the slate. Sit with a widow whose son did not come back from France. Let her tell you the same story 3 times. Stand at the kitchen door of your own house and learn the name of the woman who has been baking your bread for 9 years. The third, when you are ready to love again, watch how she looks at the people who bring her bread. It is the sentence in this letter you must memorize. It is the sentence I would have spent more time teaching you if I had been given the time. Theodore was weeping now. He had not been aware of it. He had begun to weep without noticing, the way a man begins to bleed from a wound he sustained, without remembering having been cut. Love. I love you. The love does not require you to deserve it. It only requires you to do something with it. Do something with it. Forgive your mother in advance for any sharpness she may have to use. She has been holding our family steady for too long alone. Sit with her. When this is over, in the gallery, take her hand. Do not try to say anything important. The important things in our family have always been said in the second hour of a long silence. Your father. He folded the letter. He placed it inside the breast of his evening coat. Against his shirt, he did not undress. He went out into the early hour before dawn, when the lamplighters were beginning to put out the gas, and the milk floats were starting their slow rounds, and the only motor on the street belonged to a man 2 doors down, who had been out all night. For reasons he was not going to explain to his wife in the morning, he hailed a cab. He gave the address of Ravensworth Manor. Hargrove opened the door himself. He had not slept either. He had been waiting in the front hall since 2. My lord. Has she? No. She is in the gallery. May I? Theodore walked the length of the lower hall. He climbed the great staircase the way a man climbs the stair the morning after the worst event of his life. Slowly, one hand on the banister, the other in the coat pocket where the folded letter was warm against the lining. At the end of the gallery, before the portrait, stood a small figure in a dark blue dressing gown. She had heard the bell. She had not turned. He walked the length of the gallery. His shoes were quiet on the boards. He stopped 2 steps behind her. He did not kneel. He had already knelt once that day in the wrong house, and the kneeling had not been useful. He stood. He waited. You have read it? Yes, and he was a kinder man than I had been remembering, and a sharper one. I had begun to keep him only in the easier corners of my memory. You were not wrong to. The easier corners are how the dead let us keep them, mother. I am not asking your forgiveness. I am asking you to let me work. She turned then. Her face was tired in a way he had not seen. It was not weeping tired. It was the tired of a woman who had been carrying a thing she had not, until this hour, been able to set down. He realized, looking at her, that she had been more alone in the 6 years since his father's death than he had understood. He had been told this. He had not been able to believe it. The letter in his coat had told him to believe it, and now he believed it, and the believing of it was a small splinter that would be in him for the rest of his life. Begin in the morning. Do not stop for 12 months. He bent. He kissed the back of her hand. The ring on her left hand was warm. He stayed bent for a moment longer than was necessary. He had not been close to her in this way since he was 17. When he straightened, she was looking again at the portrait. He walked back along the gallery. He passed Hargrove in the hall. He went out into the morning, which had begun to lighten, and he did not get into a cab. He walked. He walked for 2 hours. He arrived at the Albany at 7:30, packed a small case, and was on the 8:45 train to the country before the city had finished waking. He did not return to London for 15 weeks. In the country, he did the things the letter had asked him to do. He repaired a fence with the gamekeeper. He held the hand of a stable boy who died of an infected cut from a hay knife. He sat with a widow in the village whose son had not come home from the Marne 3 afternoons in a row, and listened to the same story with the small details slightly altered each time, and did not correct her. He had nothing to correct her with. He had been wrong about more important things. He visited the families of his father's old regiment in the autumn. He stayed in their parlors longer than was customary. He took the second cup of tea. He took the third. He learned their first names. He learned the names of their children. By the second spring, the house was a quieter house. Not louder. The marble had not changed. The footman had not changed. The flowers came in from the gardens at the usual hour. But the air inside Ravensworth Manor changed, in the way air changes when a window has been opened that everyone had forgotten about. Visitors noticed. They could not name it. They went home and spoke to their wives about it, and the wives did not understand them, and the men gave up trying to explain. Eliza Whitcomb entered a library training program at a charitable foundation in London in the autumn. She did not pay for it. Her tuition had been arranged. She would not be told by whom until she was 31. On a morning in May, 2 springs after the day at Thornbury, mother and son stood again in the long gallery before the portrait. Theodore was 30 now. He held in his hand a small bunch of cream roses he had himself that morning from the south wall of the kitchen. He had not been thinking about the color when he had cut them. He had only noticed the color when he had brought them inside. He set them on the small table beneath the portrait. Mother, yes, I am going to begin to look. Slowly, I do not yet know who. I am not in any hurry. Your father told you what they were. I will know her by how she looks at the people who bring her bread. You will. They stood together for the rest of the hour. If you are still listening, sit with me a little longer. The events of the story are over. The lesson is not. Have you ever noticed someone you love walking toward a door you knew the moment you saw it was the wrong door? Have you ever stood at the end of the corridor with the right thing to say and chosen against your own counsel not to say it? Because the saying of it would have cost you a fight you were not yet certain you could win. Because the saying of it would have made you, in his eyes, the smaller of you two. A mother who has lived long enough learns, sooner or later, that the falls a man refuses to take in his 20s become the falls he cannot survive in his 50s. She lets him fall sometimes, while she is still alive to lift him up afterward. She does not enjoy it. She is not cold about it. She has only learned that to refuse him the fall is to refuse him the man he become. The refusal is not love. The refusal is fear wearing love's coat. And what no one ever tells you about being that mother, until you are old enough to have done it yourself, is how lonely the corridor is. There is a second thing the story has to teach. Almost every father writes a letter to his son. Most of those letters are not sealed in red wax. Most are spoken on a porch one summer afternoon when the son is 16 and not listening. Most are demonstrated in the way the father takes his hat off when the gardener arrives. The written letters are read sometimes. The lived letters are inherited whether the son chooses to read them or not. How many fathers in this audience tonight, I wonder, have written letters they hope their sons will open in time? How many sons? How many of you have sat in a room late, the year after your father died, holding something he wrote you, and finally understood what he had been trying to warn you about? There is a third thing, and it is the hardest of them. A man is not measured by what he can build. He is measured by what he does in the rooms in which he believes no one important is watching. A man who is gentle only in front of mirrors is not gentle. He is a performer of gentleness. The performance ends the moment the mirror leaves the room. The man underneath the performance is the man who has been there all along, and his face, eventually, is the one his children will remember. If anything in tonight's story stayed with you, tell us about it. Tell us where you are sitting tonight as you finish this. Tell us about the letter you have not yet opened, the one in the desk drawer, the one from the parent who is gone now, the one you have meant to read on a Sunday for many years and have not yet read on any Sunday. We will read every reply. And if you saw yourself anywhere in this story, in the mother, in the son, in the young woman who served the bread and did not know after that someone in the corridor was preparing to take her side, then subscribe before you go. Because there are more stories like this one, and there will be one waiting for you at the end of this week. The principle in every one of them is the same. Pride wears diamonds and goes home alone. Character wears the dress no one notices and is recognized only at the hour when the right wheels stop at the door. And the man who knows your name bows to you in front of the people who refuse to see you. That is the only recognition that lasts. Good night.